Hi, I'm Jeff Potter, and today I'm going to show you how to make duck sugo using duck confit and a nice pasta sauce. So to start with, a day before you actually want to make this, get your duck legs out and you'll be salting them and letting them dry brine for about 2 hours in the fridge. So to do this, just take the duck leg, take about 2 tablespoons of salt, toss it into a container, and then go ahead and work the salt into the duck leg. I do this by just dropping the duck legs down into the container and picking them up one at a time. I find it a bit easier. But you can also just take a large pinch of the salt in your hands and actually put it right up against the flesh and work it in like this if you like. Put a little bit more salt in. And the point of the salt, it brings a fair amount of flavor into the duck, and it also pulls a little bit of the moisture out from the duck. But it's just traditional to do it with a good amount of dry curing on it. You can also toss some cayenne pepper or black pepper into here if you like. It's really up to you in terms of personal preference about what you think will taste good with this, but at a bare minimum some salt, and you can get a little more fancy if you want cinnamon, cayenne pepper, other things. So what I'll do now is I'll just put this in the fridge and let this rest for about 2 hours. And after about 2 hours, what you want to do is pull it out and we'll wash it off. So it's been about 2 hours, and I've taken these out and rinsed them off to get the salt off of them. You can let them go longer if you like, 3 or 4 hours or even an hour. You don't want to let them sit too long in that salt because it will cause it to become really, really salty. And you want to rinse the salt off before you actually put it in the slow cooker or your rice cooker, because after you're done with using the rice cooker, there'll be a layer of gelatin and fat that'll be left behind. That salt, if you leave it on the leg, is going to turn that gelatin into something really, really salty. But if you wash it off and then you save that gelatin, you can save that for something else and get this really great, duck gelatin kind of sauce that you can put on potatoes or other things. So going back to the slow cooker, you want to just put these in the slow cooker. And if you layer them in carefully, you can kind of get them to lay in a nice flat position, which is really helpful because when you go to coat it with olive oil, you can really use any kind of oil, but I just have olive oil around, so I typically use that. If you get it in nice and flat, coating it with oil doesn't actually take that much oil to get it to top. Originally, they would have used duck fat to do this because that's just what they would have had laying around in Europe at the time, just as a way of preserving it. But duck fat's a little more expensive these days, and olive oil is kind of, to me at least, the modern equivalent of something that's relatively cheap fat. The point of the fat here on top of the duck actually isn't for flavor. It's actually just to help keep the heat that's coming up from the slow cooker to get it into the actual tissue of the muscle. So I'll take this, I'll plug it in. You can come back 6 or 8 hours later and it'll be tender enough to work with, but really if you let it sit overnight or even do it the day before, it'll be a lot better. So set it to a lower medium temperature, cover it up, and just let it sit for a day. So by the time you come home, the fat off of the leg bone will have pulled back in. And this bit normally, if you're going to actually pan sear these and put them on top of a salad or something where you're going to leave the duck leg whole, what you'd do is you'd score this into a diamond pattern and you'd pan sear it down into a hot pan just by doing it basically like that. By scoring it, any fat that's underneath in the adipose tissue will be able to run out. In our case, though, what we want is the actual duck meat. So to do that, pull off the duck fat and then basically shred the meat off of the bone. And at this point, you can see how amazingly tender this is. It just falls right apart. That's because that connective tissue, that collagen, is completely at this point broken down. And so what you get are these really amazingly tasty bits of duck that don't actually have any sort of toughness to them. So go ahead and do this to all 4 of your legs. So we have the duck fat separated and the duck bone separated. Duck meat's off. Take a pan over medium-high heat, a little bit of olive oil just so the actual duck meat doesn't stick. You can swirl it around a little bit. Take this duck meat and drop it right into the pan. And the reason we're doing this is that you want to get some browning reactions on that duck meat. You actually want to get Maillard reactions. It's a reaction between some proteins and sugars that will occur. And they give food a really nice, rich flavor. And once we get the tomato into here, it's not possible to really get that same amount of browning reaction. So over medium-high heat, crank it up a bit here. It seems a little bit cold. Just let it sear for a minute or so. You can see it sticks a little bit on the bottom. The duck has some fat in it, so it won't stick that much, but the olive oil is kind of an insurance policy against that. So this is starting to sear up. I'm going to take a can of diced tomatoes. I use diced because I like the chunks in there. You could use crushed and crush them down. I probably wouldn't use pureed or too fine of a tomato. When you first put it in, use the spoon to actually go and scrape underneath the meat so that any places that that meat is really sticking to the saute pan get loosened up. Because there's a lot of flavor in those little bits. So we've got the first can of tomato, and I put some tomato sauce in as well. Just gives it a little more of a rich flavor. And we're just going to let this simmer for 5-6 minutes at the least while our pasta cooks. You can put the cayenne pepper in now too. To me, this dish really is actually about that heat, so I wouldn't skip the cayenne pepper. So we'll just let that simmer for 5 minutes while we put our pasta into the pasta water. Now you could use a spaghetti or any other kind of pasta. I prefer a nice wide pasta, something that's just got a lot of surface area in there. You want your water to be at a nice hot roiling boil. When you strain the pasta, don't actually wash it underneath the sink. You want to leave any starches that are on those noodles on there because it'll help that pasta stick better to the sauce. So back here with the actual sauce, you want to grate some cheese into it. I'm going to do this over low heat. So now I've got some cheese in there. Just stir it around to get it mixed in and let it start to melt. And then take about 10, 12 sprigs of, in my case, I've got thyme here, but you can use oregano or rosemary, really any kind of fresh aromatic herb that you like. So once you've got a fair amount of thyme in there, stir it around a little bit to get it incorporated. And then take your pasta and just work it into the sauce. You can serve the sauce on top of the pasta, but I personally prefer it mixed together. I think it makes for a much nicer dish. If your saucepan ends up being too large to actually stir this all together, try doing it in the actual pot that you cooked the pasta. That might be easier. And really, it's about the duck. It's not about the pasta, so hold back on the pasta a little bit and let the duck really come through. And then, to go ahead and plate it, you can take the pan and move it up and just spill a little bit over into the plate. That's one way if you want to save on the dish. It's a little bit messy and you've got to be careful with your pan. The other thing you can do is if you have a pair of tongs, you can just kind of grab in, pull up a bit, and then down and twist. And this way you can also kind of grab some of that sauce and put it on the top. It may not exactly look like the most amazing dish in the world. It's pretty rustic, but it's definitely one of my favorite things to have, especially in the winter. And I think, I hope that the readers of the book that I'm working on will really enjoy it too. You can put a few leaves of thyme on top. And there you go. Duck confit Sugo.